This has been, as always, an amazing conference. And as someone who has gotten to participate at all levels, including chairing, I really want to say thank you to the people who make it possible, both the people who do the work and the people who attend and the people who sponsor. We couldn't do it without any of you. So, dark matter and the deep state. Dark matter in the deep state. What do you see? Go ahead and yell. Audience participation. I know, you're European. You can get over it. Come on. Galaxies. Galaxies. You see galaxies. What you don't see, or what you're not thinking about seeing, is all of the things between the galaxies. The 85% of the universe that is dark matter that we don't know how to detect. Like, we can tell it's there because it's doing weird gravity things, but otherwise, we don't know how to look at it. All right, next. See, you didn't know you'd have a quiz at the end of the day. What do you see? Food, groceries. You see the ingredients for maybe a couple tasty meals. I think we shouldn't combine all of these ingredients in one meal. That would be very Iron Chef of us. Do you see the complicated, sensitive, dynamic, time-critical systems that make it possible for us to get multiple kinds of vegetables that are not all in the same season in the same place? Probably not, because if we thought about that, it would be really disheartening and we'd be paralyzed. All right, last one. What do you see? Stairs. Who said danger? Yeah, that's because you have grown up with dangerous stairs. These stairs are the stairs at this conference center, and they're incredibly safe. They are so safe. They are lower rise and longer run than usual. They represent decades of collective experience in ergonomics, industrial design, safety needs, materials science, and code enforcement. The reason we cannot think about the stairs and talk to each other while we go down them while carrying coffee is because there are rules about how you make stairs. There are rules about the right way to make stairs, and somebody has followed them very precisely here. This is what I mean when I'm talking about the deep state. The experts who make our lives work extremely well, who we never think about. And we are those experts for a lot of people. People running logistics companies have SREs, and also they think a lot about like trucking expenses and import duties. And they don't have to think a lot about their Kubernetes cluster because somebody else is doing that for them. Behind every industry, there are SREs, and behind every SRE, there are people bringing us grapes in the middle of winter. I thought about putting a chair up on stage here with me for the silent sysadmin. How many of you have ever identified as being a sysadmin? Right? Do you ever miss it? A little bit, maybe some. There's some like traumatized reactions out there, like, oh, I don't miss that. It's easy to focus on the stars and the new laws and the Kubernetes, but the majority of the universe's matter is dark, and the majority of people doing the kind of work we're doing are not SREs. They may not even know what SRE is. What they're doing is what needs to be done. What they're doing is their dad started a business and somebody has to stand the website up, and it's now scaled beyond what you can do with like a $99 a month subscription. What they're doing is installing the software that helps the hospital run and then trying desperately to figure out how to make it secure. Because is anyone here a software administrator for a hospital? Have you ever worked with one? Few of you. There are thousands and thousands of them, but they're not here. They should be. They need to hear the same things that we're doing. They're maybe not operating at like planet scale, but the data they touch is more important to us than almost anything else that we do. So when we think about SRE, we need to think expansively about who the unseen sysadmin next to us is. They're the women who got their start running PBXs and the men who had to learn security in a hurry for the family business. They're the people working at web scale without the words to talk about it. It is neurology and human nature for us to notice bad things more than good. You can be wrong about whether or not berries are tasty a lot of times, it doesn't matter. But you can't be wrong about whether they're poisonous. So we're really hardwired to notice and react strongly to negative events. But we know so much more than we did. We have little apps that can identify whether that berry is poisonous or not. And we can tell each other about it. Things in our world mostly work. They mostly work. When we talk about nines, you know what the most limiting factor we have is? The stability of the electrical grid that delivers it to homes. It's not your data centers that are going to go down. It's not your systems. We're out at the level of nines where, who here has had a power outage in the last year? Did it last for more than 15 minutes? All right, who has more nines, you or the utility company? Right? So things mostly work. Even during the pandemic, during this enormous global disruption, we made things happen. In 9 months, we stood up an entirely new vaccination system. It was one of the most astonishing works that we have been alive for. We came up, we had the technology, but we came up with a way to manufacture it, to distribute it and keep it super cold, to keep track of who had had it and who hadn't had it, to make sure that it got to all the places we needed to get it to license it for countries that had different economic needs so that we weren't trying to charge American prices for life-saving vaccines in places that couldn't afford that. That was amazing. Things worked. Not beautifully, not perfectly, not, easily, but they worked. When things are out of our comfort zone, they can seem impossible. And we lose track of all the things that are working. Because, like I said, as mammals, we care a lot more about adverse consequences. The current emergency that we're in always seems like the worst possible thing. When your data center is on fire, that is the worst emergency that you can imagine. It's not the worst emergency. It's just a data center. It's just your job. So what? Yeah, I use my job to feed and house my family, but I'm not getting bombed. It's just a data center. When we think about our emergencies, it's very useful to sort of look at the broader spectrum and think about where we are in that. Are your things mostly working? Are you safe? Okay, then it's mostly working. We have each other. Look around you. Look around at the people who showed up. These people are here not only to learn and to take notes and to sit in talks, but to talk to each other, to learn from each other, to leave knowing more than we came in with. And you're not going to remember specifically any of these talks. You're going to go look it up. You're going to say, oh, Laura said something about that, or I had a conversation with someone who was talking about that, or maybe we do need to have some kind of Terraform documentation SIG, I don't know. You're going to leave with that, those impressions, and that's the goal. We are good at sharing information with each other. As a community of practitioners, both the ones that are present and the ones that are distributed, we have worked hard to implement some systems to make information sharing work. As I was working on this, I heard somebody talking on the phone to his colleagues about blameless culture. I think it's really easy for people who have been going to these conferences for a long time to be like, blameless culture, that's so Etsy. We've done that, right? We're obviously doing that, right? That's old news. It's not old news to everybody. It's an exciting new idea that somebody gets to take home. And I'm thrilled. I am thrilled that we continue to be able to do this. Because humans are a part of the socio-technical system. We need to identify the code owners and the business decision makers. But we don't need that to do blame. It's not a useful way to improve the system. We've spent collective years learning to do better than that, to talk about how the system is failing and the system's inputs are not set up for success. And we need to treasure that because it makes us almost as good as the safety nerds. And the safety nerds, man, like, just because all my friends are going to university about how to become a safety nerd doesn't mean that I'm going to run off and do it. But I'm always tempted when somebody's like, and I go to London. Yeah, enabler. But I think that we have so much that we're sharing with each other, and we have so much to learn from everybody else, and it's a really exciting time to be able to communicate with each other. These photos are from an emergency education system, and if you recognize it, this is the carbon dioxide scrubber on Apollo 13. And I think this is one of the greatest feats of technical writing ever committed, because the audience for this is panicky but well-trained pilots who are carbon dioxide poisoned to a certain degree. And the writers for it are panicky contractors who are trying to fit a literal round peg in a square hole, using duct tape and the cover of the emergency manual. This is an education system that had to work. If they didn't get this right, they were going to die. And it did, because they had this shared language and this shared trust, and because they were both looking at the same thing at the same time. Does that sound like anybody else's day? Yeah? We've spent the last 3 days learning from each other, and we're going to take our conversations and the videos and the blog posts that come out of this conference and share them and refer to them when we run into similar problems. And the more people we include in our community, the more silent sysadmins we pull into that, the better it's going to work for all of us. The silent sysadmin knows a lot and has maybe seen some weird things that we haven't run into. It's funny to be in an industry that is concerned about both stability and cutting-edge technologies. It feels natural to us because we do it all the time, but it's a lot like unicycling. The only good thing about unicycling is that when you fall off, it's less sideways and more forward. One of the things that I want from us as a community is more understanding of our history, both technology and work processes and peopling. I have put out a call. Somewhere there has to exist a book about the history of computing from 1995 to 2005. If it doesn't exist, I'm going to have to write it, and I'm going to be mad at all of you, because it should exist. Before we lose the people who wrote the Agile Manifesto, before we lose the people who were there when it happened, we need to capture that history, or we're not going to understand where we come from and what we're reacting to. Our history informs us. We are in a spiral of improvement. Blake Bissell and I were talking about this the other night, that things keep coming around. But everything we're doing does have a precedent. We all have ancestors. We all have people we learned from who taught us how to do things directly and how to figure things out when we didn't know how to do them. I think this family tree of computer languages is interesting because it shows you why some languages think differently than others. Like, I don't know what it is about Smalltalk. Anybody who ever worked in Smalltalk, their brain just gets twisted to the left in an interesting way, and you can always tell the output of their work. You're like, did you do Smalltalk? And in every way, languages inform how we think. So think about our ancestors and how they were geniuses for the constraints that they had. We made it to the moon on Apollo 11 with such tiny amounts of computing power that the capsule could only handle 7 commands. When they had a problem with the landing module and went to put an 8th command in, the computer locked because it didn't have capacity to do 8 things at once. Like, that's definitely beyond its remit. Margaret Hamilton had foreseen this possibility and had a recovery instance coded in. And when I say coded in, I mean this computer was knitted with little blocks of memory on wire. Coded meant a different thing, man. They were hard. She predicted that because she had run a bunch of failure scenarios, and one of the failure scenarios included an astronaut kind of panics. And she had written something that would compensate for that. This is Galileo describing this weird, blurry thing he's looking at. It's Saturn. He's like, does it have arms? What the hell is going on? I don't understand why it should be round and it's not round. So that's 1610. In 1659, Huygens has a better telescope. And he's like, I think those are rings. I think there's like a disk around Saturn. In 1675, Cassini said, I think there's 2 disks around Saturn. There's like a gap in those rings. And then we sent Cassini to look at Saturn. It is not that they were any dumber than we are. It's that they couldn't send a probe to take a picture of Saturn and us. We're in that picture. They were geniuses for the time that they had and the constraints that they had, and so are we. But we have to remember that we're going to look like we're drawing like weird little armed planets to the future. We have constraints, but they're different. This is a 2019 picture of what we saw when we looked into space. This is so much space junk. We are peering up through pollution. It is hard to see the sky because we have put so many things into our orbit. This is before most of the small constellations of communication satellites went up. This is just GPS and weather and some of the telecoms, but not the Amazon stuff and mostly not the Starlink stuff. Can you imagine what it looks like now? They're talking about another 10,000 satellites. That's the constraint that we're going to have and we're going to have to work through. There are some nightmare scenarios called the Kessler syndrome, where this stuff starts banging into each other and we lose access to space, possibly for 500 years. We can't go up because it's just nothing but shrapnel. It's a discouraging thought, but it's encouraging to me that we're looking at it and we're thinking about it and we're predicting that this will be a problem. And there's a bunch of governmental agencies fining people for satellites that are not in the right parking orbit. They're like, your satellite is out of place, it is now space junk, we are going to fine you a bunch of money, and hopefully we're going to use that money to get it out of the bad orbit. Our solutions are never permanent. We have so much legacy and technical debt that we're not experiencing pain from yet. Some solutions are timeless until they're not timeless. Like the wristwatch. I saw that some of you are wearing wristwatches, but if you had to know the precise time, would you look at your wristwatch or your phone? Yeah, because it's more accurate and it has less slippage. So although the wristwatch solves a lot of problems, it is no longer the most accurate way we have to tell time. Some solutions are irrelevant. We don't need a faster horse or a better way to clean our day gloves or floppy disk storage anymore. Those things are not relevant to us anymore because they were solutions for problems that only existed then. But that doesn't mean that they weren't good and useful at the time. It is so easy for us to look at old technology and say, ugh, we do so much better now. Why did anybody even do it that way? Because it's the best way they had. It was a genius idea at the time they had it. And we can only honor the fact that they invented something that worked. Most solutions we have are cyclical. Like Blake and I were talking about, we just keep coming around. Sometimes we're in the distributed model. We used to call it server and client. We used to call it desktop. Now we're somewhere in the middle of the maybe cloud and desktop. Maybe we're going to go back to more powerful compute. Maybe the cloud is the way, and we need dumber, lighter terminals. But I assure you that sometime in your career, we're going to go, hey, I could have more compute right here without having to transmit it. And it will come back. We will just keep evolving this over and over. And it's not that either way is wrong. It's that the different constraints mean that different things are more or less affordable. The things that got us here will not get us to the future. This is a sextant. A sextant is a relatively straightforward piece of machinery. I mean, not super easy to build. You'd have trouble building it yourself. But it's, precision machine that enabled navigation. And when you look at it, you're like, okay, so you look at the sky and the horizon, and then you do a lot of math. Oh, there's some really gnarly math. And you have to have an accurate chronometer if you want to know what longitude you're at. Like latitude is easy, longitude is hard. But if you know that, you can wage a naval war across 3 different oceans. It's very exciting. Who doesn't want to do that? Okay, well, lots of people. But it was very exciting at the time, because now you don't have to be able to find land at any moment. The Punic War, we think about these giant battles, they had to be able to see the land, because otherwise they were completely lost in the middle of the Mediterranean. Their navigation skills were not great. There's a reason it took Odysseus 10 years, right? It wasn't super. The US Navy still teaches officers to use sextants in case, I don't know, they need it for some reason. One of the reasons they might need it is because we lose GPS. And GPS is so fast and easy and ubiquitous for us that we don't think about it. Almost every one of you used GPS to get here today. I know I did. I looked up a map to see how I was going to walk to the tram station. But possibly you looked at a map to see where you were, or to see where your bus was, or to otherwise track the movement of other people. We don't even think about it anymore. It's funny to read, I was reading an old Tom Clancy, and nobody knew where anybody was because there was no GPS. And they couldn't do radio faxes. And I'm just like, how do they not know where everybody is? We didn't have satellites for that then. So everything about how we think of ourselves in space is changed by GPS. And yet, it will become superseded. We will know where we are in space by some other means someday. When you're thinking about technological solutions that you're using, there are a few questions that I want you to ask yourself. What is your immediate problem? This question cuts 2 ways. Are you solving the problem that people are having right now instead of the hypothetical problem that you would like to be solving, which is much more interesting? Are you solving the one that people are actually having? And are you thinking about it beyond your current immediacy? Are you thinking about the problem that you have right now as it extends? Because there are a lot of hacks that we put in that solve the problem right now that are actually going to be super detrimental to us in the future. And sometimes we have to do that, and sometimes it's a bad choice. For instance, taking lead out of gasoline was a great choice. Leaded gasoline was a terrible idea. Same guy who did that also invented PFCs. He was really on a roll. Leaded gasoline, it was a terrible idea. taking the lead out made it a lot safer. And it measurably changed global IQ. But that doesn't mean gasoline is good. That was a stopgap measure. We need to stop thinking about how we could make gasoline safer and start thinking about how we could make not gasoline. We know that, but we needed that stopgap measure to buy time to get to where we are now. What is the business problem or human problem that needs to be solved by this solution? And where do you fit in that? When you are a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Stop for a minute and see if the nail needs to be driven in or pulled out. Because sometimes you need to stop and identify the problem. I sort of riffed on this during PowerPoint karaoke last night. You have to identify the problem before you can fix it. Who are you building things for? Not just the people paying you, but the people using it and the people being affected by it. So when we think about building software, it's usually like, I'm building software that holds up a cloud. And that cloud is for a healthcare software provider. Okay. Who buys the healthcare software? Hospital administrators. Okay. Who uses the software? Doctors. Who is affected by the software? Patients. It is hard for us as people who hold up the cloud for the software, for the doctors, it's hard for us to care. But if we do spend a little time thinking about that problem, it really snaps into focus how we solve it. What's your outcome horizon? How long will your impact last? Are you lofting up future space trash? Are you underbuilding or overbuilding for the future? There is nothing wrong with building a shim. There is nothing wrong with building a temporary solution as long as you can make sure it's only temporary. Because there is nothing as permanent as I'm just going to put some tape on this right now. Like if you've done any home repair, you will find 50-year-old tape on this right now. Thanks. Glad you got around to fixing that again. But the problem is, it was working, it wasn't broken. So why would you fix it? I want to talk to you about the deep, boring work. Who here does boring work? Excellent. I want more hands. Let's talk about it. I shared the stairs, but there's so many ways that we expect the deep state to keep us safe. Food safety, including allergen notes. Engineering safety that makes this building very sturdy. Emergency safety so that we can hurry out if we need to. We have the same things in our industry. The curl vulnerability that dropped yesterday, but not out of the blue. We knew that was coming. There was a responsible reporting system and a way to do the CVE so that people could have the patches ready to go when we found out generally about the vulnerability. That's good. That's boring. Have you ever written a CVE? Anybody? A couple people? How'd you feel about it?
You mean in the course? I found it.
You found it. And when you wrote it up, how did that feel? When he wrote it up, he felt, It wasn't exciting, though. Yeah. Every tedious certification that we go through is intended for safety. Sometimes it doesn't work as intended, but that's what we meant it for. Yesterday, John Looney talked to us about the regulations that are coming for consumer privacy here in the EU. Because the EU cares about that, I'm a little jealous, I'm not going to lie, and they'll make rules about it, whether or not it gives giant media conglomerates the big sad. Codes and standards aren't any good if they're only suggestions. And a fine is a price for violating them. You can make the price real high, but you're just negotiating the price. You know what heroes can do? Heroes can slay dragons. Heroes can take the handle off the pump that in the middle of town that is spreading typhus. That seems pretty awesome. I want to be a hero. You know what committees can do? Set the education standards for an entire country, or allocate money for sewage treatment plants, or run the conference we're at, or choose the requirements for the software that we can incorporate. I have been on lots of committees. I learned Robert's Rules of Order when I was 16. Going to committee meetings is never fun. It's kind of boring and stressful and involves a lot of listening to other people have opinions that are quite wrong. And then carefully, kindly, with facts, arguing with them, but in a way that makes it possible for you to be in a room together next week. And if it all works correctly, everyone is mildly dissatisfied with the outcome. That's the ultimate outcome of a committee. Everybody is slightly grumpy, but not like table-flippingly angry. I've really sold it, haven't I? It just makes you want to run out and be on a committee, right? But they're the heroes. They're the people who get work done. It is not individuals who change the world. It is this collective agreement and action. Expertise cannot be replaced by genius. It's so tempting for us, people obsessed with cool technology, to think that geniuses are the way that progress is made. We grew up on stories about Marconi and Edison. But neither radio nor electricity works very well without scale and infrastructure. The web as we know it is a collaborative event. Every talk I've attended at this conference is about the work the speaker is doing and how they've used other tools to do it. Without Hashi, without Kubernetes, Drupal, PagerDuty, Slack, none of these talks really work. We're all in this together. And we are all part of that scale of invention. I'm not against geniuses, but I want to say that the implementation of ideas is much more world-changing than the organization or than the original idea. The implementation of a genius's idea is much more important, for good or ill, than the original idea. Because we're human and because it's our job to keep the systems running, we're primed to see things going wrong in the immediate term. I know, I've said that several times already. I'm just going to keep coming back to it. Widen your perspective beyond that. We are not the only smart people here. We are not the only smart people in the world. We are at the tiny sliver of people who are smart, and people who are well-resourced, and people who are lucky. That's how we got here. We're very lucky. And you could be any of the others and not end up in this fortunate place. I like to think of people as web diagrams. This is a diagram I made about myself when I was doing a strengths chart. And in case you're wondering, that one is for organization. Like, it's really not my strong suit, doing the same thing over and over again. But I'm really good at ideation and conception. I need people who are really good at execution. I need them on my team because they help me get things done. And so when I'm broadening my perspective, I want to make sure that I select people who are not like me, who fill in the gaps in my chart and make me a more useful person, because my squirrely brain can only barely handle a checklist of 5 things before I'm like, have you ever really considered? You've met me, you know that. Care about the experience that people have. The experience of work, the experience of using software, the experience of being used by software. It's all very emotional. There's a lot of feelings involved in this, and we should maybe care about how people feel about our software. Notice the nice things that you have. I think this is praxis. I think that this is a really important part of making sure that we are keeping our wide view, is noticing how fortunate we are. That we have warm cats to cuddle, and beer to drink, and planes to get on. It's a part of the wider perspective, and if you lose that in the busyness of solving problems, It makes you less good at solving problems. Jim Larkin was jailed for criminal syndicalism. That means unionizing. But you can walk to his statue from here. I've done it already on this trip. We get taught about the history of labor organization, unionization, strikes, and strike breaking. We don't get taught so much about what happens when union and employer negotiators sit down in a room together. But I'm pretty sure that nobody wins all their points, and everybody leaves kind of disgruntled, like a committee. That's okay. They made progress. The union brought enough strength to get to the table and make demands on the employer, and the employer has been forced to come to the table and listen to the demands and decide what they are going to do about them. That's the success. The success is the strike, but the result of the success is a frickin' committee meeting. When we sit down to negotiate reliability, or when we leave our work to do the work we do in the world, that of living in community, it's not all or nothing. It's not this heroic, glorious moment. It's incremental progress towards something better. It's sitting down and having a civilized argument with somebody you want to be able to talk to next week. You're in this room because someone thought your attendance was worth a few $1,000s. That's a pretty strong indicator that someone believes in you and has invested in your career. Don't forget to pay that on, to be the person who helps the next junior out. You don't have to be a heroic champion for them. Just try to make sure that they get some of the same breaks that you did, because that's how you're going to make the world incrementally better. And I hope you do. I have been Heidi Waterhouse. If you are interested in any more of my thoughts, I have a website with a blog, and if you are interested in hiring me, that is also possible to negotiate. Thank you all for your attention.